Okay. Cell church, I almost hate to even get into this. It's that word, the last 2 or 3 years, late 80s, early 90s, especially the early 90s, that idea of cell church has been brought back to the forefront. A man in Seoul, Korea years ago started some things that had some, the cell church idea basically is an administrative issue inside of a local assembly. It's become very, very, very popular in this particular day and age to not be a PBD, a program-based design church, but rather be a cell church instead. And I think the identification that there are major problems in the administration or the working out of the unsearchable riches of Christ, identifying that as a problem has been very much welcomed and is very accurate. There are major problems, and the leaven, a little leaven, leavens the whole batch, and so virtually every batch in the world is filled to the brim with leaven because there's not enough relationship, and the working out of the Word of God and the light of God and the fellowship one with another is almost absent in most places except for the 10% in every church that are very devoted to Christ. But a little leaven leavens the whole batch, so it even affects the 10% that are totally devoted to Christ and are successful in some manner in their own personal lives. Their children are affected by the double standards that happen in most things that are called church. So identifying the problem is certainly accurate, but I would submit that solving it with an administrative solution is not God's heart. It never was, it never will be. And a lot of people have found that the fruit of these things haven't been especially good. They've put a lot of stock in certain things happening a certain way and a lot of things changing. And it's still new enough that a lot of people really haven't reached the conclusion yet that, hey, this isn't bearing the kind of fruit that I thought it would. A lot of people have peeled off from this cell group movement as they've realized that it hasn't had the effect that they thought it would or bore the kind of fruit that it would. But for the most part, it's still new enough that it sounds intriguing and the reports are from someplace else about how great it is. And so it really hasn't had a chance yet to be identified in a local environment very much. It's still too new. Well, we're still working out the bugs. It really is good, but we're still working out the bugs. Well, if you talk to an average person in the cell group movement, you'll find out that most of what's happened is they've moved big church into a living room. They still have a hierarchy. They still have an agenda, a pre-programmed thing. They have a little bit more opportunity to look each other in the eye, and they can have cookies and things now that make it more sociable and so on. But for the most part, it's, maybe the 10% has increased to 20%, but the average person in an average church, maybe they don't even want to be part of a cell group, or maybe they're going on vacation, and so, let's cancel cell group for the summer, or whatever. I mean, it's just so shallow. It is very unlike anything you find in the New Testament. You don't find any administrative units in the New Testament. Certainly the God who wrote Leviticus, if he wanted to lay things out that way, he could have laid things out that way and expressed himself and recorded it as such, but that wasn't his heart. And there's no evidence whatsoever in all the very careful recordings of Luke, the medical doctor, the scientist, and all the very careful O Theophilus analysis of what happened in the working out of the administration of Christ. There's just not even a hint of anything like that happening, where there's a senior pastor and then associate pastors, and these men are on salary, and then zone group leaders or shepherd leaders or assistant this and assistant that, and all that hierarchical addition, man-made wisdom from the earth. It's not God's wisdom, and it doesn't. I hate to say it, but it's not from the Word of God. It's just extrapolated and is sort of manipulated to kind of pushed into a slot so it looks that way, but it's not really the picture you get when you read the book of Acts. You would never reach that conclusion that's how they functioned. They were in their homes. It was a family. They were from house to house, but it wasn't you're assigned to this house, or this is a house that I go to all the time, and you go to that house. I mean, there were certainly areas, homes, that people did migrate towards, but it wasn't a membership sort of thing with a hierarchy, and then all the psychology that tends to come with that whole package. You know, I've seen it written, whatever you do, don't teach in a cell group, because my experience has been in 3 decades of cell groups that if you teach, then things will kind of go astray. So you can talk about what the pastor said on Sunday morning at the big meeting and talk about that, but don't teach. And if you get to more than a certain number, you've got to divide, because if you don't, then this will happen or that will happen. Well, again, that's psychology, group dynamics. That's not anything you'd see in the Scriptures. And you can extrapolate things and try to make a point about it, but the fact is you don't see, in the first century church that's the way that they function. And in addition to the biblical testimony that it's an organic life, not an administrative issue with psychology worked in and group dynamics worked in, but even beyond that, I think the testimony of the last 8 years in our life has been, without any of that kind of stuff, and I guess that was the question, are you a cell-based church? No way. Absolutely not. We have no cells. What we have are people that love each other, that are devoted to each other, that have deep relationships, that intermingle across the city, that spans a 60-minute drive or more. They're people that are fully involved and integrated in each other's lives. The gifts are there. People watch and pray, and they're involved. We don't have anybody that sits at home watching TV all night. Not a single person in the entire church lives a self-centered, worldly lifestyle. Everybody's life is involved. That doesn't mean there aren't traps and there aren't temptations for people, but because the network of life and the fabric of relationship is such that they're devoted one to another, that we are daily in public and from house to house to house to house. Because that's true, the Word of God is being brought into people's lives on a regular, in fact, daily basis. And that was actually a command in Hebrews 3. Admonish one another daily, warn one another daily, encourage one another daily, be called alongside one another daily, however you want to translate it. Do it daily. And if you don't, people will be hardened and people will be deceived. So, I take that as right from the mouth of God, and I hope that you will too. If you're not involved in that daily, if you're not doing that daily, if that doesn't describe your church from the least to the greatest, from one end to the other on a daily basis, the people are called alongside. Every single person from the least to the greatest is involved in the process of being devoted one to another on a daily basis and bringing the Word of God into each other's lives and applying it in the homes and the workplace and everywhere on a daily basis. If that doesn't describe the ecclesia, the church that you're a part of, do something about it. Don't be a radical, don't be a heretic, don't be an accuser of the brethren, but get in and do something about it, because that's God's heart, and a little leaven leavens the whole batch. So you will be leavened, your family will be leavened, the people you love, the good things that you do will all be leavened if the whole church isn't functioning that way as an organic whole, members of one another.